On my 75th birthday, as the lights of Manhattan glittered against the glass walls of my penthouse, I raised my crystal glass of champagne and smiled at the applause of 40 guests. The jazz band played softly, the waiters moved like clockwork, and the smell of roasted duck mingled with the scent of orchids flown in from Singapore. It should have been a perfect evening, but in the corner of my eye, I saw something that froze my blood. My daughter-in-law Lydia leaned toward my coat draped over the chair by the balcony door. With one practiced flick of her manicured hand, she slid something small and metallic into the pocket. She looked up, her smile dazzling, as if she had merely adjusted the fabric. Everyone else clapped for the speech that had just ended. Nobody noticed, but I did. You see, I didn't build Harrington Global Finance by missing details. I learned to spot trembling hands in negotiation, false smiles across boardroom tables, the microsecond of hesitation before a lie. That tiny motion, the way Lydia's fingers moved with purpose. The slight stiffness in her shoulders told me she wasn't adjusting my coat. She was planting something. Have you ever seen betrayal unfold at your own family table? If you have, or if this story already has you hooked, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I want to know how far this story travels. My name is Edward Harrington, and I am 75 years old. I spent 5 decades turning an initial $5,000 loan into a global investment empire. The penthouse where we gathered that night cost $20 million. The watch on my wrist, a Patek Philippe, was worth more than some of my employees' homes. I owned 2 Bentleys, a Rolls-Royce, and an estate in the Hamptons, where U.S. senators had once toasted under my roof. And yet, in that moment, none of the wealth meant anything. Because I realized that the greatest threat to my legacy wasn't the shifting markets or ruthless competitors on Wall Street. It was standing right there, smiling at me across a room full of friends and allies, my own daughter-in-law. Her name was Lydia, 38 years old, sharp-eyed and sharper-tongued, a woman who had left her pharmaceutical marketing job the second she married my only son, Daniel. She carried herself like a queen in her black Dior dress, but behind those eyes I saw calculation. For years she had treated my fortune as her personal inheritance in waiting, and my son, God bless him, had let her. Daniel was 45, handsome, still clinging to the idea that helping Dad with the company meant weekly lunches and quarterly board appearances. I had given him an allowance since his college days, hoping he'd grow into responsibility. Instead, I'd watched him drift like a man who believed the tide of wealth would carry him forever. But the tide was turning. A week before this party, I'd called them both into my study, the mahogany-paneled room where Harrington Global had been born. I told them the truth. I was selling my company, and 80% of the proceeds, billions, would go to the Harrington Foundation for Children, a cause close to my late wife's heart. Daniel's face had drained of color. Lydia's lips had tightened into a razor-thin line. She called it our money. He called it his inheritance. They both stormed out. I thought the matter was finished. That evening would be my public announcement, and they would have to accept it. But as I stood in my penthouse, champagne glass in hand, watching Lydia's delicate fingers slip that object into my coat pocket, I knew the fight was far from over. She wasn't the type to accept defeat gracefully, and I wasn't the type to surrender without a battle. The sound of laughter swirled around my penthouse that night, but beneath it my thoughts churned like a storm tide. Lydia had slipped something into my coat pocket, of that I was certain. She thought her little move was invisible, hidden beneath charm and champagne bubbles. But I'd spent my life reading markets, faces, and motives. She had made a fatal mistake. She underestimated me. 1 week earlier, when I announced the sale of Harrington Global Finance in my study, I could feel the air tighten like a coiled spring. My son Daniel tried to cover his shock with forced optimism. So what does that mean for us, Dad? When do we start planning the investments? His eyes glittered with dollar signs the same way they had when I bought him his first Mercedes at 25. But my next words sliced the room into silence. 80% goes to the Harrington Foundation for Children. 20% remains for modest inheritances and your mother's and my retirement. Lydia's hand had gripped the armrest of her chair so hard her knuckles turned white. 80% Edward. That's our family's money. Daniel is your only son. We've supported you, attended your events, smiled for the cameras. You owe us more than scraps. That word owe echoed in my mind. They believed my decades of sacrifice, 60-hour weeks and sleepless nights, balancing investments across continents, meant nothing. They had chosen dependence over effort, entitlement over responsibility. I remember leaning back in my chair, studying their faces. You are not entitled to my life's work simply because of your last name. You will inherit values, not fortune. What I'm giving you is the chance to build your own legacy the way I built mine. The slam of the study door was their answer. I didn't hear from them again until the morning of my birthday, when Lydia called in her most honeyed voice. She apologized for their emotional reaction and insisted they would attend the party to show support for my generosity. I didn't believe a word of it. A leopard does not change its spots in 7 days. And now, as I stood among my friends, judges, attorneys, old colleagues, even Father Bennett from St. Augustine's, I realized her sudden sweetness had been nothing more than theater. Tonight wasn't about reconciliation. Tonight was about seizing what she thought was slipping away. For a moment I felt a heaviness in my chest, not fear, but sorrow. Betrayal has a unique weight to it, heavier than any financial loss, because it comes wrapped in the face of someone who once kissed your cheek at Christmas. Yet as I stared at the skyline beyond the glass, I whispered a quiet prayer into the noise of the party. Lord, thank you for giving me clear eyes. Perhaps you wanted me to see this, to understand the truth, before it was too late. I didn't know yet what Lydia's plan was. The object in my pocket could have been anything: papers, a contract, a hidden device meant to trap me. But one thing was certain: she wasn't here to celebrate me. She was here to erase me. And as the jazz quartet slid into another song, I knew this birthday would not end the way she expected. The party had reached its perfect rhythm. Waiters glided across marble floors with silver trays pouring champagne into baccarat crystal. The jazz quartet filled the air with soft brass notes that blended with the hum of conversation. From the balcony, the lights of Manhattan glittered like scattered diamonds, reminding me why I had chosen this penthouse at the top of Central Park Tower. It was more than real estate, it was a throne above the city. My guests admired the view, complimented the menu, and congratulated me on decades of achievement. Judges, CEOs, lifelong friends, even Father Bennett with his warm, steady presence, they believed this was simply a milestone celebration. None of them realized the storm brewing in the shadows. And then Lydia made her move. She drifted through the crowd with effortless grace, her black Dior gown catching the light, her diamond necklace worth more than most people's retirement savings. Her smile dazzled, her laugh tinkled like glass, and yet her eyes kept cutting back to me sharp and watchful. I excused myself from a conversation with Judge Reinhardt and strolled casually toward the bar. As I passed the coat chair, my hand slipped into my pocket. My fingers brushed against cold metal, a USB drive. Sleek, polished, unmistakably planted. I knew instantly what it meant. Lydia wasn't foolish enough to risk poison or something messy. No, she had chosen a weapon far more elegant and devastating: paperwork. A forged contract, perhaps, that transferred controlling shares of Harrington Global Finance to Daniel. A legal noose tied tightly and disguised as my own decision. If anyone discovered that drive later after a long night of wine and celebration, they would say poor old Edward signed while he was tipsy. The stress got to him. It would be her word against mine, and with Daniel at her side, they'd paint me as senile. My empire, my legacy, gone in one stroke of falsified ink. I sipped my champagne slowly, the bubbles sharp against my tongue. Let her think she had won. She had no idea that I had already prepared for this moment. You see, after our confrontation in the study last week, I suspected she wouldn't let it go. That's why I'd arranged my own little insurance policy. The fountain pen clipped neatly in my jacket pocket wasn't just a pen. It contained a hidden micro camera recording every move she made within range. I had also prepared a duplicate USB drive of my own, loaded not with forged contracts, but with something else entirely. Evidence. Evidence of Lydia and Daniel's scheming, captured from months of private conversations and messages I'd managed to collect. Tonight, if she attempted her little coup, the very stage she chose to humiliate me on would become the scene of her undoing. As she swept past the champagne table, her perfume trailing like smoke, I caught her reflection in the glass doors. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Those eyes were hunting, calculating. She thought she had set the trap perfectly, but she hadn't realized the old lion still had claws. The moment came, just as I knew it would. Lydia waited until the jazz quartet paused between sets, the perfect lull when attention could shift without suspicion. She glided toward me, her diamond heels clicking against marble, a picture of grace and devotion. Daniel followed half a step behind, his expression tense but eager. Edward, Lydia purred loud enough for nearby guests to hear. You forgot to mention one more thing in your speech. Something very important. She reached into my coat pocket with theatrical flourish and pulled out the USB drive. My USB drive. Her lips curved in triumph, as though she'd just pulled a rabbit from a magician's hat. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Rebecca Shaw, my corporate attorney, narrowed her eyes. Father Bennett looked confused. Lydia raised the tiny device high like a relic. This, she announced, proves that Edward has already signed a private agreement, transferring Harrington Global Finance to his family. He only pretends to donate 80%. The truth is, he still trusts us, his blood, his son, his family. The room stirred. Some nodded politely, unsure. Others looked at me, waiting. I let the silence stretch, sipping from my champagne, my hand steady as stone. Then, with calm precision, I gestured to my staff. Please, I said, my voice carrying the authority of decades in boardrooms, connect that drive to the screen. Let everyone see the truth for themselves. Lydia's confidence flickered for just a second, but she quickly masked it with a dazzling smile. She thought she had won. The projector screen lit up, A folder appeared. She leaned forward, ready to bask in her victory. But instead of forged contracts, a video began to play. Her own voice filled the room, sharp and venomous. If he won't give us the money, we'll take it. We'll make it look legal. We'll say he signed drunk. No one will believe a 75-year-old man over his own family. The footage shifted. Daniel's voice joined hers. All we need is his signature on the fake papers. He won't know the difference once the cameras are off. The room froze. My guests, judges, lawyers, lifelong friends sat in stunned silence. Lydia's painted smile collapsed into something brittle and terrified. I turned toward the crowd, my champagne glass raised once again. You see, friends, the truth has a way of surfacing when you least expect it. Tonight, we celebrate more than my birthday. Tonight, we celebrate clarity. Lydia staggered backward, the USB trembling in her hand. Daniel muttered, "No, this can't be." His face turned pale as marble. My attorney, Rebecca, stepped forward, her voice crisp. That recording is admissible. You've just incriminated yourselves in front of over 40 witnesses. Gasps, whispers, judgment like a tidal wave crashing down on the two people who thought they had cornered me. I looked straight into Lydia's eyes, letting her feel the weight of every second. You tried to trap me, but you forgot one thing. I didn't survive Wall Street by letting snakes slither through my garden. Then I turned back to my guests. If you're still watching this unfold, still following how betrayal reveals itself, type "I'm here" in the comments right now. I want to know how many of you believe the truth always finds its way out. The silence in my penthouse was heavier than the marble columns holding it up. 40 pairs of eyes stared at the giant screen as Lydia's own voice continued to play back like a confession carved in stone. He's old. He won't even know what he's signing. Once we have the papers, the fortune is ours. And if he resists, we'll make him look senile. No judge will take his side. The words slashed through the room like knives. Every guest had heard them, unfiltered, undeniable. Judge Reinhardt, a man who had presided over corporate fraud cases for 3 decades, broke the silence first. His tone was clipped, judicial. This isn't hearsay. It's conspiracy. Rebecca Shaw. My attorney nodded sharply. And attempted fraud at the highest level. Edward, you did the right thing preparing evidence. Without it, they might have succeeded. Lydia's face drained of color. The flawless Dior mask cracked, revealing something hard and ugly underneath. She clutched the USB in her trembling hand, as if squeezing it tighter could erase what everyone had just heard. "This is edited," she snapped, her voice shrill now. "He's manipulating all of you. He's paranoid." But the words fell flat. Because if there's one thing greed can't fake, it's composure. And she had lost hers completely. Daniel stepped forward, his voice uncertain. "Dad, this isn't what it looks like. We were just frustrated, talking nonsense." We didn't mean I raised a hand, silencing him. Frustration doesn't drive someone to forge contracts, Daniel, or to plant false evidence in my coat. This wasn't nonsense. This was intent. Gasps rippled through the guests again. Father Bennett, standing by the bar, spoke softly but firmly. "The scriptures warn us the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. Tonight I see that warning in living form." The words hit harder than any legal accusation. Because they weren't coming from a judge or a lawyer, They came from a man of faith, someone whose voice carried moral weight. Lydia tried to laugh, but the sound cracked. "You're all letting him manipulate you. Can't you see? He's old. He doesn't know what he's saying." But even as she spoke, my guests shifted back, as though afraid her desperation might be contagious. They saw it now, the cold calculation behind her, smile, the hunger in her eyes. My old friend, Charles Donovan, who had built skyscrapers with me in the 80s, leaned on his cane and shook his head. "Lydia, I defended you more times than I can count. But hearing your own voice tonight, it's over. You can't hide from this." The room had turned into a courtroom, and the verdict was written across every face: guilty. I stood tall, my champagne glass steady in my hand. This empire wasn't built to be stolen in the dark. It was built on hard work, discipline, and faith. Tonight I reclaim it, not with anger, but with truth. For the first time that evening, Lydia's composure shattered completely. The predator mask slipped away, leaving only panic. And in that panic, everyone in the room saw her for who she truly was. I let the murmurs wash over the room, then raised my hand for silence. 40 guests, frozen between disbelief and outrage, turned their attention back to me. For a moment I stood there quietly, letting the weight of the truth settle. Then I spoke, my voice slow, deliberate, and steady. "Do you know why I caught this?" I lifted the Mont Blanc pen from my jacket pocket, the one that had recorded everything. "It isn't because I'm cleverer than them. It's because God gave me clear eyes when I needed them most. At 75, He gave me the wisdom to see betrayal for what it is. He didn't let me be blinded by the glitter of false loyalty." The room went still. Even Father Bennett lowered his gaze and whispered an amen. I turned my eyes back to Lydia and Daniel. "You believed the Lord had left me weak, too old, too tired to notice. But He was watching while you whispered in corners. He was watching when you planned to strip me of my life's work. And He made sure I was watching too." Lydia's lips parted, but no words came out. Daniel looked like a boy caught stealing from a church collection plate, shame and panic battling across his face. I pressed on. "Wealth is not the prize of this life. It is a tool. And if I allow it to fall into greedy hands, then I betray the very blessings God entrusted to me. That's why 80% of what I built will go to the Harrington Foundation. That money will buy books for children who can't afford the medicine for children who would otherwise die, schools for neighborhoods long forgotten. That is the legacy my wife believed in, and that is the legacy I will honor." Applause broke out. Not polite clapping, but genuine, heartfelt approval. Judges, neighbors, old colleagues, even Father Bennett himself all raised their hands together. They weren't just celebrating my birthday anymore. They were celebrating truth, faith, and justice. Lydia stepped back, her face pale as porcelain. She tried to muster a defense, but her voice was drowned out by the sound of honest people rallying around me. For the first time, she looked small, diminished in the glow of something greater than wealth integrity. I raised my glass once more, this time not toward her, but toward the ceiling, as though toasting heaven itself. Tonight was meant to be about giving thanks, and I give thanks to God for sight, for strength, and for the chance to set things right. The crowd echoed. "Hear, hear." The sound filled the penthouse, louder than jazz, louder than any whisper of betrayal. And as I stood there, I knew faith had turned their scheme into ashes. The applause faded into whispers, then into a silence so sharp it could cut glass. All eyes shifted from me back to Lydia and Daniel, and in that silence, their empire of pretense collapsed. Lydia clutched her Dior clutch bag like it was a life raft. Her face, once radiant with charm, was ghost white now, the diamonds at her throat trembling with each rapid breath. She opened her mouth, but nothing came, just a strangled sound, half plea, half denial. Daniel took a step forward, his voice breaking. "Dad, listen, it's not what it sounds like. We were desperate. You can't just give it all away. It's ours by right." By right, Judge Reinhardt's voice cracked like a gavel. "Young man, you've just confessed in front of 40 witnesses that you plotted to defraud your father. There is no right in theft, only crime." Lydia spun toward him, her words tumbling out too fast. "No, you don't understand." Edward misunderstood, he twisted it. "He's old confused. We were only talking. Only talking." Rebecca Shaw, ever precise, raised a hand. "Talking doesn't involve planting forged contracts in a man's coat. Talking doesn't include conspiring to label him incompetent in court. I'm calling this what it is: attempted fraud, conspiracy, and elder financial abuse." A gasp ran through the room. Elder financial abuse. The phrase hit like thunder because it turned their betrayal from family drama into criminal offense. Daniel's legs seemed to buckle. He looked around the room as though searching for someone to take his side. But every face he met was hard with judgment. Even Father Bennett's gentle eyes showed nothing but sorrow. Lydia made one last attempt, lunging toward the USB still glowing on the projector. "It's fake, all of it. He set us up." Her voice cracked into hysteria as she tried to yank it free, but two of my security staff stepped forward, blocking her path. Calm, professional, immovable. The sight of them, the same men who had guarded diplomats at United Nations galas, reduced Lydia's frantic lunge to a trembling retreat. The hush that followed was suffocating. Then Sarah Collins, an old friend of my late wife, whispered what everyone was already thinking. To try this on his 75th birthday, in his own home. The shame was unbearable. Daniel covered his face with his hands. Lydia just stood frozen, her chest heaving, eyes darting for an exit that no longer existed. In that moment, I realized their greatest punishment wasn't the law or even the loss of fortune. It was the undeniable truth burned into 40 witnesses' memories. They were willing to betray their own blood for money. And nothing in this world erases that stain. I set my glass down on the marble counter and stepped forward, my shoes echoing across the penthouse like a gavel striking wood. The room stilled. 40 witnesses held their breath, waiting to see whether I would scold, forgive, or falter. I did none of those things. Instead, I reached into my jacket pocket and withdrew a thin leather folder. Its gold clasp caught the chandelier light, gleaming like a sword unsheathed. I opened it slowly, deliberately, and raised my eyes to the crowd. "Some of you may wonder if this is only a family quarrel," I began, my voice calm but sharp. "Let me assure you it is not. Betrayal of this magnitude demands more than words. It demands action." Rebecca Shaw, my attorney, stepped closer, already knowing what was inside that folder. I handed it to her with steady hands. She held it high. "These," she announced, "are the finalized contracts transferring Edward Harrington's controlling stake in Harrington Global Finance to the Harrington Foundation. Effective immediately." Gasps swept the room. Lydia staggered back as if she'd been struck. Daniel's mouth fell open. I looked directly at them, my gaze unflinching. You schemed for years, believing you could inherit an empire built by sweat and sacrifice. Tonight you plotted to take it by fraud. And so tonight, I make sure you inherit nothing. Lydia's face crumpled, her voice rising into a wail. No, you can't. You can't just sign it away. That money was never yours, I cut in my tone like steel. Not by effort, not by right, not by blood. And as of this very night, it is beyond your reach forever. Rebecca placed the contracts back into my hands. I picked up my Mont Blanc pen, the same one that had recorded their conspiracy, and signed each page with deliberate strokes. The scratch of ink on paper was louder than any outburst. With each signature, their power dwindled until nothing remained. When I set the pen down, I spoke again. They wanted everything. Now they get nothing. And these witnesses, my friends, my partners, my neighbors, will remember this night, not as the night of my downfall, but as the night of my justice. Applause erupted, thunderous and unstoppable. Glasses clinked, voices cheered, and the penthouse shook with approval. Not one person sided with Lydia or Daniel. They were already ghosts, exiled by their own greed. Daniel collapsed into a chair, burying his face in his hands. Lydia tried to scream over the applause, but her voice cracked into silence. For the first time, she realized there would be no appeal, no second chance, no inheritance. I raised my glass one final time that evening, not to them, but to the cause that would outlive us all. To the children who will walk into brighter futures because of this choice. May they never know the poison of greed, only the blessing of opportunity. The toast roared back in unison. And in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, complete, unshakable peace. When the last signature dried on the paper, a strange calm settled over me. For months, perhaps years, I had lived with a weight pressing on my chest. The weight of knowing that the people closest to me didn't love me for who I was, but for what I had. Tonight, that weight lifted. The applause gradually faded as the guests returned to quiet conversations, but the energy of the room had changed. It was no longer a birthday party, it was a rebirth. A line had been drawn in stone and everyone knew it. I turned toward the balcony, the city lights stretching endlessly below. Manhattan sparkled like a field of stars, but for the first time I didn't see wealth or towers or empires. I saw freedom. Freedom from manipulation, freedom from false loyalties, freedom from the exhausting act of pretending blood always means family. Behind me, Lydia had shrunk into silence. Her diamond necklace no longer looked like a trophy, it looked like chains. Daniel sat with his head in his hands, his shoulders slumped. And in that image I saw the truth I had ignored for too long. Giving them everything had only made them weaker. Stripping them of it might finally give them a chance to stand on their own. Sarah Collins, my late wife's closest friend, approached me with tears in her eyes. She would have been proud of you tonight, Edward. You honored her spirit. You honored what you both built. Her words cut deeper than any toast or applause. My wife's dream had always been the foundation, helping children who had no voice, no resources, no hope. Tonight I secured that dream against the claws of greed. Daniel finally looked up, his eyes red. Dad, I don't know what to say. I thought I was entitled. I thought you'd never cut me off. I studied him carefully, searching for truth in his broken voice. You are never entitled to my fortune, Daniel. But you are entitled to your own future if you choose to build it. That is something no one can give you and no one can steal. He swallowed hard and nodded. For the first time in years, I saw not the spoiled son, but the boy I once carried on my shoulders at Yankee games. Maybe this fall was what he needed to rise. As the night wound down, guests approached one by one with handshakes, hugs, words of respect. They didn't speak of wealth. They spoke of courage, of integrity, of drawing a line when it mattered most. And as I looked around, I realized something powerful. The family I thought I might lose tonight wasn't worth keeping. The family I discovered instead, the friends, colleagues, neighbors who stood by me, was worth more than all the money in Manhattan. For the first time in decades, I felt at peace. As the last guests filtered out and the jazz musicians packed their instruments, I stood alone on the terrace of my penthouse. The city hummed below me, restless and bright, but in my heart there was stillness. For 75 years, I had fought battles against rivals, against markets, against time itself. But none had cut as deeply as the one that unfolded tonight under my own roof. My son. My daughter-in-law. The people who should have protected me instead plotted to destroy me, and yet I was still standing, stronger than before. I looked up at the night sky, the stars faint against Manhattan's neon glow, and whispered, "Thank you, Lord. You gave me the eyes to see, the courage to act, and the wisdom to preserve what matters. You let the truth rise when deceit tried to drown it. And for that I am grateful. Wealth is fragile. Legacies can be stolen on paper. But faith makes a man unbreakable. Tonight proved that no empire, no inheritance, no title is greater than the peace that comes from knowing you stood your ground with God as your witness." Behind me, Daniel lingered by the door. His face was tired, humbled, and for the first time in years, honest. "Dad, I want to start over. Not with your money, with my own work. Will you believe in me if I try?" I placed a hand on his shoulder. "Son, belief is earned, but you've taken the first step. Now walk the rest with dignity." And with those words, I felt a strange certainty. Perhaps redemption was possible not for Lydia, whose greed had consumed her, but for Daniel, who had finally tasted what betrayal felt like from the inside. I raised my glass one last time, not to the skyline, not to the fortune now out of reach for the greedy, but to the unseen hand that guided me through this storm. To faith, to truth, to justice. If you've been listening to my story and it touched something inside you, I want you to do two things. First, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, because betrayal doesn't care about wealth or age, but truth always wins. And second, subscribe to Brian's Stories and hit the notification bell so you don't miss more of these stories of faith, family, and justice. Because at the end of the day, my friends, money may fade, but dignity lasts forever. And when you walk with faith, no scheme, no matter how clever, can steal what God has written for you.